according to CNN, intermittent fasting may not be as helpful for losing weight as previously thought. In today's show, what we're going to do is dive into this new study titled Association of Eating and Sleeping Intervals with Weight Change Over Time, the Daily 24 Cohort. And this was actually published in the Journal of the American Heart Association. Now, I want to share with you the strengths and limitations of the study and what they actually found, and then talk about the media analysis here. And it's kind of interesting that CNN is now talking about fasting. And I say it's interesting because over the past several years, there has actually been several studies showing that intermittent fasting might be a viable strategy to reduce the underlying health conditions that are linked with severe COVID-19. But that was not covered by any major media outlet, but that was talked about in medical literature. So let's talk about this study and talk about the strengths and the limitations and essentially what they found and the shortcomings. So for background and context, there's been various studies that have found this was a study in Spain that tracked individuals for 20 weeks, showing that later lunch eaters tended to gain more weight over the course of the 20-week period, suggesting that meal time and feeding window and fasting window did impact weight loss. And so this was a longer duration study to actually evaluate this. And there was 527 participants in this study. One of the limitations that we're going to talk about is half of these participants actually dropped out during the course of the study. Now, before we talk about what they found in terms of the authors, the conclusions and the tables and the significant findings here, it's important to recognize that this study was drawing off using a mobile application for participants that enrolled in the study where they would record for just one day. Now, some participants recorded more than one day, but most people just logged in once and estimated their meal size using drop-down, small meal, medium meal, large meal. And they recorded what time they woke up, what time they went to bed, and when they ate their meals. So think about that. Again, just one day. This wasn't like people were logging in every single day, like Simeon Panda and other researchers that have investigated over the course of shorter duration 12-week studies. They had participants log into our smartphone app every single day over the course of the study. And in those shorter 12-week studies, they did find a correlation with meal timing and fasting timing as it relates to weight loss, independent of any calorie restriction. But again, the details of this design, functionality, and screenshots and so forth are available in a separate manuscript by Wolf and colleagues. And essentially, what they were tracking is eating behaviors as well as meal timing. And as I mentioned, they had a 24-hour wheel where people could say, I started eating at 8 in the morning and then stopped at, say, 6 p.m. and so forth. And they just estimated the calorie content of the meals. Okay, so that's the sort of parameters of the study, and I'll share with you the statistical findings on the screen here. You can see essentially what they found is that meal timing did not impact weight change, but the size of the meals, meaning having more frequent large meals and more frequent medium-sized meals compared to smaller meals, was linked with weight changes. They say, in conclusion, in this clinically based prospective cohort, the number of large and medium meals was positively associated with weight change, while number of meals was inversely associated with weight change. The distribution of energy intake earlier in the day appeared to be associated with less weight increase after enrollment. I want to pause there. We've talked a lot about this, about early time-restricted feeding. I know a lot of people are doing sort of intermittent fasting a little bit, what I think, backwards insofar as they're fasting all day and bookending their day with a lot of energy. And we all know that when we're sleeping, the central nervous system and parasympathetic tone is not there to digest and process food. So it's better to actually eat earlier and start your fast earlier in the day. And we'll talk about solutions and ideas towards the end about using berberine hydrochloride to kickstart your fast and stuff like that. But again, they did say the distribution of energy intake earlier in the day appeared to be associated with less weight increase after enrollment. Duration from first to last meal, as well as other meal patterns, did not show a clear association with weight trajectory. Essentially what they're saying is the fasting window didn't impact weight trajectory. So I think that's quite interesting. They say our findings do not support the use of time-restricted eating as a strategy for long-term weight loss. Further large-scale studies with long follow-up time are needed to better characterize the association of timing of eating with weight change. Now, here's where we're going to talk about the limitations and my thoughts on this. Okay, here's first limitation. They say about half of all enrolled participants did not use the app and had to be excluded from the analysis. Okay. Now that just could be that most of these people, it was part of, I think, Johns Hopkins and a bunch of major hospitals and things like that. People are going in for other medical services and care, and maybe they're not interested in being part of the study, they just forget about it. I'm not going to do that. Now, the second limitation they say is the follow-up after enrollment was short compared with the before enrollment, and the associations between eating exposures and weight for the prospective associations were less precise, likely because of fewer weight measurements. Okay, they also say, thirdly, we're not able to determine the intentionality of the weight loss before enrollment and cannot rule out the possibility of reverse causation because of pre-existing illness, meaning people are going to a medical clinic, they might have diabetes or obesity and things like that. So they may be more motivated to change their eating patterns and so forth. And so that could affect the bias of the study and so forth. But they do say, nevertheless, in the sensitivity analysis, they did restrict participants who did not plan to make changes to their dietary patterns. So they're suggesting that the data is a little bit more sensitive and specific. And fourth, they say, we used averages of the eating periods across the days only when they logged in to the app. So it's not like, again, like I said, comparing other studies like Simian Panda and other time-restricted feeding studies where people were using the app every day. This was just a periodic where they got a text reminder. Some people only logged in once, right? And there was only 527 people in this study. It wasn't like hundreds of thousands. And so they are acknowledging that and so forth. So that's it for the limitations. What are my thoughts about this study? Well, there's many ways to skin a cat, as they say. And when it comes to feeding fasting patterns and meal timing, meal frequency, and strategies, you can pick and choose which one works for you. For people who are very, very physically active, meal timing may not be that big of a deal. If you go to the gym all the time, if you're very physically fit, you walk after meals, the meal timing may not really matter. But if you're sedentary, if you're insulin resistant, if you're already overweight or obese and have had poor metabolic health for a long period of time, then you might need to and might get better benefits from applying compressed feeding windows into your meal pattern strategy. Now, if you look at people in Latin America, let's just say, they do not generally practice intermittent fasting, yet they are very lean, oftentimes, excluding countries like Mexico and Chile, where the obesity prevalence actually is worse, believe it or not, than here in the US. If you look at countries like Colombia or El Salvador or Ecuador, some people, even in Spain and France, people don't start eating meals sometimes until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, especially on the weekends. Yet these people do not have obesity. So because of their lifestyle, a lot of these people do not have cars in different parts of Latin America and Europe. And it goes back to what I was just saying when it comes to exercise. If you exercise a lot, the importance and the credence that intermittent fasting will have on your overall body composition and metabolic health may not be that appreciable. So I think what this study shows, and other studies corroborate this, is we need to implement a degree of personalization to this. So you need to ask yourself, if you're excited about intermittent fasting from a weight loss perspective, how is your exercise habits? Are you walking after meals? Are you lifting weights 4 to 5 days per week? Doing all these things. If you're not, then maybe you crank in on the compressing your feeding window as a modality to better improve body composition. But again, this study, it's nice. It was published in a great journal, right? A reputable journal. We've shared actually a lot of studies over the years from the Journal of the American Heart Association and so forth. But there's a lot of limitations, as we just talked about. Again, users only logged in sometimes once during the duration of this 6-year study, in comparison to the 12-week studies. Simian Panda and others have users logging in every single day. So I think that's an important thing to consider. Now, as we've talked about before, one tool that I like to help people better recognize the importance of is using berberine hydrochloride to kickstart your fast. And your fast starts at the end of your last meal, okay? And I'm a huge fan of early time-restricted feeding. Again, it makes more sense from a biologic perspective. Your gastrointestinal tract from a circadian rhythm perspective is actually most active between 11 and say 4 p.m. for most people, depending upon if you're a shift worker or not. And so you really should be eating the bulk of your energy during the middle part of the day, not having a massive meal and then going right to sleep. But if you're wanting to get a little bit more mileage and cut those food cravings, you can always try the Berberine Fasting Accelerator from our sister company, Myoscience. Check it out, 2 to 3 capsules with your last meal or shortly after your last meal can help with appetite control and induce feelings of satiety, especially if you're prone to evening snacking and the like. But interesting study. And I think, again, one of the most interesting findings of this study, if any, is that people who eat earlier in the day and have a larger breakfast tended not to gain as much weight compared to people who had larger calorie meals later in the day. And again, this has been corroborated by many studies. So I think that's the biggest take home here. A lot of limitations, of course. And I think it's funny that CNN is now talking about fasting. But anyway, I would love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below, my friends. I will link the study and some of the media coverage of this in the show notes. As always, I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for hitting that like button. Thanks for sharing this episode, and we'll catch you on a future one down the road. Bye now.